Okay, let's start chapter 6, and it's mostly about the country entering into its big business mechanization phase. And so a lot of these owners, they start building bigger and bigger businesses. And there's a lot of reasons for it, and there's a lot of things to keep track of. Now, one thing I want to say about this book is that it'll repeat itself again and again. You'll think that man, I thought we already did this part because you'll see the same thing repeated, and I'll try to point them out as we go through. But here we go with the business of being big. If you remember in US1, Cyrus McCormick developed the Reaper and started a factory in Chicago to make more reapers, and then he developed a reaper that could automatically bound harvested wheat with wire. And so this is where we get mechanization. That's our first vocabulary, or our only vocabulary word, mechanization, the use of machines to replace human or animal labor. So instead of having people going through and cutting the fields with a sickle or with tools, you now just need a team of horses and this reaper, and boom, you are now taking care of your fields much faster, easier, and once you pay for the reaper, you don't have to pay anybody but yourself to use it. So why did big businesses grow? Um, Transportation advances. We already had the railroad. Now there's a lot of railroad lines. And so it was easier to transport things all over the country from New York to California. Uh, you can not only transport things, but transport a lot of things and large things. Shipping now could go and reach anywhere that you had a rail line connected to it. Also, these machines like the Reaper would um, make factories, make producing things much easier. Now that you have these machines that are automated to create something, now you can set up these assembly lines where somebody makes a part instead of an artisan making an entire machine, let's say a car. If you have just one or two people build one car, it's going to cost a lot of money because they have to know how everything is made and how it goes together. But if you make an assembly line, one person could make the door handle, and all they do is make door handles. They're specialized in that one thing. All they do is make door handles, and then they give it to somebody else who puts a door handle onto the car, and that's the only thing they know how to do is put the door handle onto cars. And that way you don't have to train people for very long. They don't need very high education. They don't need to understand how the door works or how the car works. They just need to know how the door handle works. And so the assembly line allows complex objects to be built quickly, efficiently, and with as little, with less educated people. Also, advertising took a big boom. Um, you see advertisements all the time when you watch stuff on the internet, TV. You drive down the road, you see road signs that have advertisements on it. There's advertisements everywhere, papers, you name it. There's advertising there. And so those are designed to make people want to spend money. And when people spend money, then businesses get bigger. They make more money and they are able to expand their businesses. So advertising spurs a lot of this spending by regular people to generate the type of income these big businesses need. Also, there's not a lot of competition going on. And if there were, businesses would swallow up their competitors. What that means is if you own a gas station and there's a big company like Exxon, let's say, and they see that you're doing very well, then they might come over and buy you out. And that's what happened, let's say, to YouTube. YouTube was its own company, and Google came in and bought them out. And now we're starting to see some more competition, but we have our own captains of industry that we could be talking about that's going to mirror a lot of what we get in this book. But that's what businesses do. When they see a smaller competitor that's doing really well, instead of trying to compete with them, they will just buy their business. Say, hey, we'll give you a lot of money. Go retire, enjoy your life, and let us continue this business. And so that's what happens, and we'll see how that happens later on in the chapter. All right, so why did industries grow? First, easy access to raw materials and energy sources. Because of those railroads, things like coal would be able to get to wherever they needed, whatever city needed that energy in order to function and run these factories. Immigrant labor. You're going to see a lot of people. We're talking about um, people leaving the South because of Jim Crow. You're going to see people leaving the farms and going into the cities. And of course, immigrants from abroad are going to be coming over. And we discussed that in chapter 4 um, briefly. But immigrants are going to um, bring a lot of cheap, they represent a lot of cheap labor. They're not highly educated normally. Um, and so not only do they not have to pay them because they don't have many skills, but they're used to living a lower lifestyle than many Americans and are willing to take less pay. And then, and then we got new inventions. Things like cars, telephones, light bulbs, gramophones. Um, they all needed to be built in a factory. So when you have a demand, remember when you had advertising and people want to buy these things, well, you have to produce them, and in order to produce them, you need these factories, and so the demand for these objects, these devices, spur big business. And finally, financial resources. New ways to borrow money to start businesses led to rapid growth of all sorts of new companies. So the banking system is going to be set up so that people can borrow money, start a business, and a lot of these, some of these businesses turned into very large, powerful businesses. As I said before, people would leave the farms, leave the South, and end up going into the cities, which created a lot of labor for these companies, these factories, which allowed them to pay the people less and make more money to grow their business and to make the products cheaper and more widely available. Another thing too is that the advent of the mail order catalogs. Now, this is something that I remember as a kid. What was it? It was consumer something. I can't remember. But you had the Sears catalog. You had all these different catalogs. They would send you a huge, it looked like a phone book, and it would have all these pictures of all these clothes, toys, bicycles, furniture, whatever could be sold were in these catalogs, and you would write down the order number and put a check in the mail and send it off, and then they would send you, or at least they would send to their nearest location the item. A lot like how we do things on the internet today. Mail order catalogs, like it's basically the Amazon of that day. Um, and then finding the money to make more money. This is where we get into the financial resources, where not only did banks lend money to people to start businesses, but people started selling shares. So the way shares work is that, um, let's say there's 100 shares in a company. And usually they have many more shares, but let's say there's 100 shares, and I sell you 10 shares of the company, and you give me a certain amount of money to help me run my business. Then when I make $100, you'll get 10 of those dollars because you have 10 shares and I've got 90 shares. So I get 90% of the profits and you get 10% of the profits as a reward for giving me the money for investing in my company. And we try to further the business. And so this is where we get stocks and all these other things where people invest in businesses. Now the risk of that is that if you invest that money, you give me all that money and get the 10 shares, and then I go out of business, well, those shares are useless. They don't do anything for you. So it's definitely a risk, but that's how people get involved in some businesses. If there's a business that you believe in and you've got money, then that's the best way to get involved in that business. So I'm going to stop right there. That is the beginning of the businesses being big. Just make sure that you remember these, why the businesses grew big. And that's because of transportation, lower costs, advertising, and lack of competition. And then why did the industries grow? Easy access to raw materials because of the railroads, immigrant labor, new inventions, and financial resources.